welcome everyone to our inaugural event. My name is Stacy Wilson. I'm an occupational therapist who is situated in the Raleigh, North Carolina area. I am also a co-founder of the Coalition of Occupational Therapy Advocates for Diversity, otherwise known as COTAD. So I wanted to just start off by just saying, welcome again to everybody. Thank you for your time. This is our inaugural event for the BROTHAS, which is an acronym for Black Male Registered Occupational Therapy Healthcare Professionals, Assistants, and Students, which was founded last summer after the second COTAD Ignite event. During this event, we specifically focused on the Black male experience in occupational therapy. And we had a series of panelists that just talked about and shared their experience of being a Black male in the OT profession. Many topics were discussed, such as our experience of being a Black male in a majority white female profession. We had some rich discussion about being a Black OT and working with non-Black clients, as well as Black clients. And then we also spoke about how to protect your energy and the need to just have a support system. So really putting our talk into action, we founded a Facebook group with a mission to create a safe space for Black males in our field so that we can uplift, empower, and support each other through the journey in our OT careers. If you're a Black male, we invite you to join our Facebook group, which can be found by searching for BROTHAS, and that's B.R.O.T.H.A.S on Facebook. And right now, we're just excited to hear from Dr. Moses. So now we'll turn it over to Andre.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. About our keynote speaker tonight, Dr. Moses Ikiugu is a prominent leader, scholar, and researcher who has made invaluable contributions to the field of occupational therapy. He is a renowned and significant figure in both the World Federation of Occupational Therapy and the American Occupational Therapy Association. And he consistently continues to inspire current and aspiring professionals in the occupational therapy profession. Dr. Ikiugu is currently a tenured professor at the University of South Dakota, where he specializes in research, design, and data analysis, psychosocial rehabilitation, therapeutic use of self, and groups of occupational therapy and philosophy. He's been awarded several grants for research throughout his tenure, one of the most recent notably involving NASA. Starting his occupational therapy journey in Kenya for over 30 years, Dr. Ikiugu has represented excellence within our field, working to expand and develop the profession while educating and mentoring others along the way. Now, I would like to give the floor to BROTHAS member and keynote speaker, the Honorable Dr. Moses Ikiugu.
Thank you very much, Andre, and all the members of the steering committee. I'm really humbled by this invitation to speak here. I thought that in addition to speaking about research, we probably want to situate it in the context of attracting and supporting more African-American men in the profession. So that is the context within which I'm gonna be talking today and about my research.
Today, just by chance, I took a look at the labor statistics today, just to look at the percentage of African-American men in the profession. And we are approximately 0.584%, not even 1% at this point. So, the coming together of this group is to drive those numbers up. That is one of the main focuses, because you have to think about that 0.584. If we're in a room of 200 occupational therapists, there may be one Black male there. So we really want to, lend our support to especially up and coming males and provide support and mentorship, and just to, like I said, to get those numbers up.
Yeah, currently our Facebook group has about 64 people who are on a part of the group. So that's 64 African American, ranging from new grads to students to people who've been in the profession for 30 plus years. So it's just great to be able to have that as a resource to be able to, I'm interested in moving up in my career. There's other brothers who have done that, and just kind of picking a brain about, how that process was for them, or, learning about, what I could do to put myself in a better position to go deeper into management and things like that. And then also for the new grad and student to be able to figure out, what am I doing after I graduate? Because that's probably the number one question that everybody has. What setting should I go into? And the different pros and cons, and just kind of what to expect. So this group has been great as far as just dialoguing and communicating about just different experiences that people who have had, be in the profession for many years to just being students and just getting started. So
those of you who are in academia, you have a unique position where you can actually help to influence those that have not heard about a profession or just new to the profession. Sometimes they get their foot in the door and they get stuck right there. So it's up to you all now to figure out unique ways to support them, because you know that their needs are sometimes different from the average OT student's needs. And sometimes, like me, I had 3 children when I was in OT school. So I had needs that are unique. You might have other therapists out there that have unique needs while they're in OT school. So we have to be aware of those needs and be able to support them through those difficult times, because those are the hiccups that someone else might be able to go through. That might be a roadblock for them, and they may never proceed any further towards this profession. Individuals who are on this discussion, you also can be a part of this if you fit the criteria, 1, and 2, if you know someone else that does fit it, share the word. We're not gonna say this is just ours and ours alone. No, we're open to others that fit the criteria, and we want to help others to grow. We're not shutting the door on anyone else that fits this criteria.
I've watched your work. You've always been an inspiration to me as a great practitioner in the field. So, as all of us know, 2020 was a very tumultuous year that changed how the world worked. It changed how OT worked. Now, was your research, particularly speaking of the participating in psychologically rewarding occupations and the implications for well-being, was that influenced by the ongoings of 2020, or did you have that idea prior to the pandemic?
I had that idea prior the pandemic, and actually I was going to talk about how the evolution of this research came about. But during the pandemic, it became even more important, because one of the things that my team and I examine is the whole idea of meaning in life, and how occupations feature in the meaning in life, and how people can use occupations to construct meaning for existence. Mm-hmm. And obviously, with the COVID, this became so stuck in the sense that people's routines were disrupted. The things that people used to do changed, and so it then became even more important to help people identify what is meaningful to them and figure out how to incorporate it in their lives.
Okay, wow.
Yeah.
Well, another question. You are a very well-traveled man, being part of the World Federation of Occupational Therapy, hailing from Kenya. I wanted to know, do you find the approach of does occupational therapy differ from country to country when you're discussing with your colleagues from various places in the world? Do you find a difference in their approach as opposed to the approach in the US?
Definitely, yes. And the difference is that you will find mostly probably related to money. It's related to how you pay for health services. So when I practiced in Kenya, of course, occupational therapists and complete discretion regarding what they did with their clients, because you did not have to worry about insurance. So you did programming for your clients based on what you judged was the best for them.
Oh, okay.
And then I did my sabbatical in South Africa in 2016. 2016, came back to the US in 2017. And basically it was more or less the same thing. Even though in South Africa they have an insurance system, but still the way they practice is very different from the way we practice here. So I think that that difference in the payment system actually makes a difference in how we practice as occupational therapists.
Okay, very, very interesting. Okay, I'm gonna take it back about 10 years. So you received a grant around 2012, and it was revolving around smart home technology, facilitating telehealth and independence. Now, do you think over the past decade, this area has grown substantially, or the things that you were looking at that time, it's roughly about the same?
Actually, this area has grown a bit. This was a group grant, which interdisciplinary grant. And what we were trying to do is to find out how technology can be used to support people in their homes, particularly in long-term care. And so it included things such as sensors that will detect how people were changing their posture while they are sleeping. And it could detect when people were up. And so we wanted to understand those habits as a way of preventing injuries and the falls. But since then, we have actually come a long way, because what we were doing then, it was very preliminary compared to the technology capabilities today. Because today you can actually use your phone as a sensor and other sensors to track what someone is doing. So it's very advanced at this point.
Okay, all right. Now, another question. Now, all of us know you as an innovator, and you know, pushing the envelope. Now, I've heard word of the Ikiugu Center. So could you tell us a little bit more about that and your motivation behind it?
Actually, the motivation behind it was, I might as well talk about what I was going to talk about even before the PowerPoint comes, because it is all related. So when I moved, in fact, I graduated from the Kenya Medical Training College in 1985 as an occupation with a diploma in occupational therapy. And as you can imagine, when I joined the profession, I didn't know what it was. You know, my interest was psychology. And at the time, there was no major in psychology anyway in Kenya. So someone advised me occupational therapy was the closest. So I did that. So after I graduated, naturally, I went to work in mental health, and then went back to school and studied and became a psychological counselor. And so actually left the profession altogether and started doing psychotherapy. And then after 5 years in doing that, I migrated to the US and went back to occupational therapy. So at the time, I was thinking that, in fact, I understood a program, a PhD program in transpersonal psychology, because I thought I would become a psychotherapist full-time professionally. But then, as I was working in West Texas, when I migrated to the US, I was posted in Sweetwater, Texas, which is just west of Abilene. And I had a supervisor that was kind of showing me the ropes. And when I did the client goes, she would say, "You have been influenced too much by mental health. This is not how we do it. In this area, we measure, range of motion and stuff like that." And then for therapy, we were doing a lot of exercise. And so I was concerned because that's not the occupational therapy I knew. So I asked her, "Well, we are doing exercise. How are we different from physical therapists?" And the answer was, "Well, actually, there is no difference between physical therapists and occupational therapists. The only difference is we focus on the upper extremities and we leave the lower extremities to them." Needless to say, I was shocked by that answer. And I figured that if I was gonna practice as an occupational therapist, then I'm better have an idea of what I'm doing. So I applied, this was in 1995. So I applied at Texas Women's University to their Master's in Occupational Therapy program. And so I was called for an interview. I went for an interview. The late Dr. Jeanette Scandi was there. She was the dean of the School of Occupational Therapy. And then Dr. Schultz, who later became my doctoral chair. And so after the interview, Jeanette called me and said, "Well, you already have a master's. Why do you want a second master's?" I said, "Honestly, I don't even want a degree. I just want to know what I'm doing because what I'm doing currently doesn't seem right." So I decided to come back and relearn what occupational therapy is if I'm gonna earn a living doing that. So she said, "Well, we have a PhD program here focusing on occupational adaptation. I think you would be good for that." So I thought a bit, and finally I thought, well, I already have my skills as a psychological counselor. I already know that a PhD doesn't teach you new skills. It teaches you research. So maybe I don't need a PhD in psychology. What I need is probably to understand the conceptual basis of OT. So I enrolled in their program. Long story short, I decided to do my dissertation on the philosophy and culture of occupational therapy. And so the way I did this with the assistant of both Dr. Schultz and Scandi was I decided to examine the profession historically. So I went back all the way to the moral treatment movement, and then the mental hygiene movement, and all the way to the present, trying to tease out the key intellectual ideas that seemed to influence the profession and how things were practiced. And through this work, what I came to learn was the philosophy of pragmatism seems to have had a big influence on the development of the profession. For example, we focus a lot on habits and the routines. Well, actually, the origin of that was the formation of pragmatism itself, beginning with Charles Sanders Peirce and his postulation that that belief is a rule for action, and we act in order to verify our beliefs. So we are always kind of doing experiments, and once we confirm and believe, then we repeat that behavior. So then we develop a habit. And this was picked up by William James, who then developed our own discourse about habit and how important it is, not only for individuals, but for societies in general. And then building on that, the philosophy, people like John Herbert Mead went on to talk about how we evolved, developing the mind as a way of adapting to our environment. And then John Dewey took it a step further and saying that actually the human mind is an instrument that we use to adapt it to our environment. So animals, if you want to eat a new diet, an animal will wait through generations, through natural selection, to develop a digestive system that can digest new food. Human beings developed a mind to solve that problem. So the human being can figure out, by cooking the food, you break it down, so then you are able to digest it. So you don't have to wait for millions of years to develop a new digestive system. So that's how we use the mind. However, not everyone knows how to use the mind. Like any instrument, you have to be trained on using it. And this is what he called instrumentalism, the use of the mind as an instrument for adaptation. So then I thought, well, maybe this needs to be more apparent in occupational therapy. And so I decided to, after my dissertation and after graduation, I decided to develop a theoretical model centered around that notion of instrumentalism. Now, of course, as you know, philosophy alone cannot stand. So I needed a theory to support that model. The natural theory for that would have been Darwin's theory of evolution, since it played a key role in pragmatism. But then that's not what we do, because we don't work with the people trying to help them adapt through natural selection. In my search, I came across complexity theory, and it seemed to be more in tune with what we do. Complexity theory says that complex adaptive systems tend to consist of multiple agents that are in dynamic interaction with each other and with the environment. And in the process of adapting, of interacting with an environment, they develop characteristics that are new, that are different from whatever any of the individual agents expresses. And that's how complex systems adapt to their circumstances. But complex systems also have a trajectory. And this trajectory is structured by an attractor. So you can imagine like the planetary system around the sun, it has a trajectory, which is the orbit, but that orbit is structured by the gravity of the sun. And so, so then thinking about that, I thought, okay, you can consider the occupational behavior of human beings as a complex, dynamic, or adaptive system. But what is the attractor for that system? At the time, the key concept in the profession was purposefulness. So I thought purposefulness of doing something would be the attractor. So we did a retro study with a colleague who was at the time my student to test that hypothesis. And we found that actually purposefulness was not the attractor. Instead, it was meaningfulness. People structure their occupations based on what they find meaningful. So for instance, if what is meaningful for a person is graduating as an occupational therapist, all the occupations will structured with that goal in mind. So that will determine the daily routine. The same thing goes, like for instance, if many of us are attracted to the profession because we want to help other people. And so what you find is that our daily routines tend to be structured around being able to help other people. So according to complexity theory, you can think of the attractor as a basin with multiple points of attraction, depending on what people think is meaningful in their lives, okay? So based on that launched a new line of research to look at meaningfulness, its nature, what meaningfulness is, the role of meaning for occupations. And so the next step then became, I came across an article that said the way meaningful occupations work is that they activate the reward neural pathways of the brain, and that's how they engender those that sense of well-being. And so my team decided to test that hypothesis. So I worked with a friend who is a cognitive psychologist and specializes in functional magnetic resonance imaging. And so we designed an experiment where we got people to participate in occupations that they found meaningful, that they chose using the COPM. And then using the mirror neuron theory, we recorded them doing those occupations, and then they were put in the magnet and they watched themselves in doing that. So the expectation was that the reward neural pathways would light up. Well, that did not happen. And so then we were stumped. But then we thought a bit, and we realized that actually we did not fail, because if you think about it, when we do things that are meaningful to us, they don't always produce that positive feeling, which we can characterize as a sense of well-being. Sometimes things that we do that are meaningful to us can even be painful. And so maybe we need to look at meaningful occupation in more detail and separate those that produce that sense of well-being, and those are meaningful, but in the moment of doing them may not produce that. And so we hypothesized that if those of you who are familiar with the work of Sint Meyer, who is a cognitive psychologist, talked about the sense of flow. So those occupations that produce that high, which is you call the sense of flow, they would cause positive mood. And so our goal became to find out the occupations that cause that sense of positive mood. And so we did another research study, and what we found is that all meaningful occupations, people tend to find them as physically and mentally stimulating. They also find occupations that connect them with other people to be very meaningful. But occupations that are rewarding, that cause positive mood, have an extra characteristic. They are perceived as fun in addition to those other characteristics. So we decided to develop some guidelines for use of those kind of occupations as media in therapy. And so we developed those guidelines. And as you know, once you develop guidelines, you need to test them. We tested them with our university community members, staff, students, and faculty. And this was a pilot study, so it wasn't conclusive, but the results were as we expected. And then during that time, I was invited by a team to work on a project. This was a team from the South Dakota Regional University system, consisting of material scientists, computer scientists, and they needed someone from the medical side in the team, so they invited me. And what they were doing is that the material scientists were developing flexible sensors using nanotechnology, which can be worn by astronauts under their suits and transmit health data, so that if they're in space, for instance, this data can be transmitted to a central computer and then downloaded, and then they can get help that they need. But then they also wanted, the reason they wanted me was to provide an idea of how these kinds of data then can be used. And so I joined the team, and that is how the NASA project started. So my job or my research project, what we are trying to do then is to find out how a program that is based on participation in meaningful and psychologically rewarding occupations can be used as a means of enhancing well-being of astronauts while they're in space. Now, obviously, we don't have access to astronauts. First of all, there are very few of them. And so we figured that we can use a proxy. And the natural proxy are freshman students. For one, if you read the literature, you will see that we have a problem, a mental health problem, particularly in North American campuses. So students are having a lot of problems: stress, depression, relationship problems, addictions. And so they already have that problem. Now, those who are transitioning to college for the first time, obviously they have even a bigger problem, because they're in a new environment and they are trying to adjust it to a new schedule, a new way of doing things. And so we figured that this can be very good proxy for astronauts. So if we test our intervention and find that it works with them, then we can develop recommendations for NASA based on that. So that's what we've been doing. So what we are doing is we are using the guidelines that we developed. So we help the research participants identify personally meaningful and rewarding occupations. Then we work with them to develop individual goals that will enhance participation in those kinds of occupations. And then we based on the mirror neuron theory. The mirror neuron theory states that our brains don't know the difference. So if I see you doing an activity, my brain interprets it as if I'm doing it. That's how we imitate others. That's how we are able to even have empathy with others. And so this was established long ago when they were working with the macaque monkeys and so forth. And so we are using that mirror neuron theory because obviously astronauts are not going to be able to participate in occupations that they need to. But if they can record those occupations before they leave, they can record themselves on video doing them, and then they review those videos later on. In actual fact, it's the same as them doing the occupations. So they can develop a program of watching themselves doing enjoyable occupations in which they participate with other people. And that will be a way of keeping themselves healthy, particularly psychosocial health. And so that is what we are testing. So first of all, we have these students participating in occupations. We're collecting data, biometric data, including things such as heart rate, breathing rate, sleeping patterns, how long they sleep, how many times they wake up at night, and usually we collect those data using a smart band, and then they send a screenshot of the data to me every day, and then I document that. And then we also collect salivary cortisol, which is an indicator of how much stress they have. And then we also use some other paper assessments like emotional self-regulation questionnaire and a few others. So then we transition, we tell them, okay, now start participating in the occupations. Now just watch yourself on video, participating in those occupations. And then we take measurements again. So the goal is to compare whether, first of all, there is a health effect of participating in those occupations. And secondly, whether that effect can be attained by them watching themselves on video doing those occupations. So in short, that is what we are doing now. So what it has become is that it has actually branched in many ways. So it's not only a research project to inform what recommendations we'll make for NASA, but also now it is a prototype of the kind of programming we can use on college campuses to help students stay more healthier. Because as we know, counseling departments are overwhelmed and OTs are not doing that right now. So why can't we do it? Okay. So in short, that is my research trajectory and how it came about.
Oh, wow. All right. So you have taken us from your humble beginnings as being, in South Africa, all the way up to the stars with NASA. So we as the brothers, we see you as one of the GOATs. And when we say GOAT, we associate that term of endearment as greatest of all time. So we put you right up there with the Jordans and the Kobe's. Now, we as the brothers, we can go on forever asking you questions, but what I want to do is kind of open it up to the audience to see if they have any particular questions for you.
And also, Doctor, if you could resend your PowerPoint, even if you're not might not be able to go to all of it, if you could resend it again to Delvin and see if we could try to get the remaining parts, okay?
Okay, let me resend it. Of course, I've pretty much covered what was in it, but I'll resend it and see.
And while he's looking for that, everyone, is there any questions that you'd like to post in the chat?
There are two comments in the chat.
Okay. So, Mrs. Domingo, I see that you have a question. Could you unmute yourself and state your question to Dr. Ikiugu?
Hi. I was wondering if you've found any models and theories to be more culturally fluid than any others, or ones that you prefer working with?
So if I found some models and theories that were close to,
Like easy to apply to any cultural population, like fluid and diverse?
Yeah, that's a great question. Of course, part of looking at the philosophy and culture of occupational therapy, I stand in OT theories quite a bit. That's how I got into theory and development and so forth. And the simple answer is not really. I don't think any model is adequate to address not only all cultural issues, but even for one client, many times one model is not going to be able to address all that client's issues. And this was one of the problems when I started teaching theory at the University of Scranton. And the students were getting overwhelmed. So you are teaching us all these theories, which ones should we know, didn't know? And how are they used? And then therapists would tell me, well, we don't use theory because none of them works for everything. So again, I went back to my psychotherapy years, and I remember that in psychotherapy, we used it to have what was known as eclectic movement, because psychologists and the same problem of having so many theories and fighting about what theory works, what doesn't, which theory is easier to apply, and so forth. And so someone figured that you can develop a method of using theories that is non-committal, that you can use whatever theory works with your client at the moment. And they call that eclecticism. So I thought, why can't we do the same thing for occupational therapy? And that's how I developed the eclectic framework for use of theory. So that is based on the idea borrowed from psychotherapy that is known as strategic eclecticism. So if I'm working with a client, I look at the presenting problem, and I think which theoretical framework speaks to that problem the best, that I can use as a lens to understand this person. Let's say I ask someone things that they like to do and they don't even want to talk about it, or what do they value, they can't state that, what are their interests, they can't state that. Then I might think that this person seems to have a problem with the motivation, the motivation to do anything. So here maybe I can use Moho because it would provide me with the best way of understanding this person's motivational issues. Are they able to identify their values properly and occupations that are consistent with those values? Can they really identify their interests and so forth? So then that becomes the way of looking at that person for that moment. But let's say as I work with a person, I find that finding things they like is still a problem. then I might say, okay, now I'm gonna use the Canadian model of occupational performance, because if I use the COPM, that's the best way of communicating with the person, having a dialogue, so that together we can work on helping this person identify things that they want to do, need to do, or expect them to do on a daily basis. So now I've incorporated the Canadian model as a complementary model. But then as we work, I find that I need to teach this person new skills in order to be successful in occupations. Now I have to borrow teaching learning strategies from the behavioral types of theories. So you can see that it's a dynamic process, but you are not sticking to any particular model, because what works even with one person changes depending on what stage of therapy you are and what else is happening in that context.
Right. And so that's what I've really found, is that like you have to utilize multiple models and theories. And I've also just noticed that occupational therapy terminology as a whole is really limiting to non-Western cultures because of what we define as independent and what we kind of base our like progress of patients on. So it's really nice to hear your insight on that. Thank you.
Exactly. And also that is why in the current literature, occupational science literature, you will find a lot of discussion of occupational justice. And now they are beginning to talk about how occupational occupational therapy theory is reinforcing the colonial culture, where everything from the West is good and everything from the South and other cultures is not good. And so now we are also finding that it's necessary to help people from other cultural contexts develop their own theoretical models that reflect their culture. So, like for instance, recently I reviewed a manuscript from Chinese authors who were in defining occupational balance using their cultural notion of harmony, because balance doesn't, the whole notion of balance doesn't make sense occupationally in the Chinese culture. When you say balance, I think of a mechanical system with a fulcrum and two sides balancing each other. So, but when you say occupational harmony, where you are balancing solitary with co-occupations as well as family occupations and religious activities, now that makes sense to them. So yeah, we still need to develop theories that reflect other people's experiences.
Thank you.
All right, we do have another question for you. It comes from Mr. Adam Pearson. Mr. Pearson, could you unmute yourself and state your question, please?
Absolutely. First and foremost, thank you so much, Doctor, for this presentation. It is illuminating, and I want to piggyback on everybody else and say that it is an honor to have you come join us tonight. I think you might have partially answered my question, but I might revise it a little bit. What was the biggest unexpected cultural challenge in applying your research?
Well, the challenge is always, I'm in South Dakota, and so finding research participants is always difficult here. The entire state is it's about maybe 1 million people now, maybe less. And so recruiting participants is tough. And so one of the things I've found, and I'm the director of research in my department. So what we decided as a department is that we have to develop a specialty of doing research with small samples. But my biggest challenge actually was not in research, it was in practice. I told you that my first gig was in West Texas. And that was not a very good experience at all, I can tell you that. And so, so that is where I learned the whole notion of white privilege firsthand, because a white therapist doesn't have to think about, am I gonna be accepted by my clients? But that was a real challenge for me. There are many times when I actually walked into a client's room and I said I'm an occupational therapist, and they wouldn't even let me finish. They tell me, get out of my room or I'll call the cops. So just get out. So when you are faced with that situation, you can imagine that succeeding is a struggle. But it is also the reason why we need to attract more people of color in the profession, so that there is mutual support. And then there is also mentoring people so that they can be able to overcome those challenges. But yeah, so in terms of research, yeah, there have been challenges, but mostly about recruiting participants. But the real challenge was actually in practice.
Thank you.
All right, great question. Now we have another question from Mushred Ahmed Landeryu. If you could please unmute yourself and state your question.
Hello from London. How are you? I just wanted to ask, really, you've kind of answered some of this already, but over here, there is a big movement about decolonizing curricula, and it's shown some really good results. So I've just started doing that with our occupational therapy curricula, where I am at my university, at London South Bank University. And I'm really finding such great resistance to decolonization. There's this, I don't know, I want some advice how to become, how to really get my colleagues who are predominantly racialized as white to really come with me and understand that I'm not taking knowledge away, but I'm enhancing knowledge, adding to the curricula. You've been here a bit longer than me, but how do you get your colleagues who are racialized as white to come with you and join you with actually making something better in decolonizing the curriculum?
Thank you very much for the question. Actually, you are further ahead than where we are right now. So first of all, our curriculum is very much determined by the Accreditation Council on Occupational Therapy and Education. So we are always struggling to meet the standards so that we can stay accredited, but also so that our students can pass the NBCOT exam. So that is one of the problems of introducing materials that are related to decolonization of the curriculum. But then the second problem is that even the whole idea of multiculturalism, we've had to fight hard for that. So if we are talking about the University of South Dakota, for instance, when I came to this institution, there were hardly any people of color anyway, other than Native Americans, one or two maybe on campus. And I joined a group that was called Campus Enhancement Group. And we were advising the president on multiculturalism, on cultural diversity and all that. But we did not really have any power. We did not have any, all we could do is advise, but nothing was happening. That is until the accreditation, the accreditors came and cited the university for lack of diversity. So now the body, the Cultural Diversity Enhancement Group, was upgraded to the President Council on Diversity. And so working in that council, then we hired a diversity officer and so forth. So from there, we started including diversity programs and programming and developing instruments to measure how far we are in terms of developing diversity. And right now we are trying to integrate content on diversity in the curriculum. So you can see how far we are from actually talking about decolonialism. We are just trying to bring the content on diversity in the curriculum to begin with, and understanding really what is diversity and inclusion. And then, of course, depending on where you are, other things can pose a problem. Like we're in South Dakota, which is a very conservative state, and we're in a public university. And so the legislature really defines what we do. And recently they have been making a lot of state laws that discourage diversity. They don't want us even discussing diversity. They think it's reverse discrimination or something along those lines. So basically, that's where we are. I would say that you are probably further ahead than us in this regard in England. I don't know what the other folks think, but that would be my perception.
Okay, another great question. Now we do have a hot button issue, which it was a hot button issue a little while ago regarding the OTD mandate. And that's a question from Mr. Delvin Champagne. So Mr. Champagne, if you will unmute and ask that question.
Hello, Dr. Ikiugu. I want to ask a question about your opinion and your thoughts on the previous discussion. Like Fred said, that we had the big discussion that was regarding the OCD mandate and also OTA to bachelor's degree. As a research professor, what do you think about that for as entry level? And also, would you think that to do that, would that be a further barrier to access to the profession on both entry points, OTA and OT? Thank you.
I'll just give my opinion, and this is why I say this is just my opinion, not my university's position or anything. But now I'll speak for occupational therapy because that is the programming I'm very familiar with. And we transitioned to entry-level OTD. And we did it intentionally. And here's the reason why. We had a master's program that was credit heavy, 81 credits for a master's degree. That's insane. And so in faculty meetings, I started complaining. So I started saying, what are we doing? 81 credits. I have a master's degree. It only took 36 credits. Why don't we go ahead and make it a doctorate? Because we just need to earn a little bit of the extra more advanced coursework, and then it's a doctorate. Because when you have 81 credits and you are you are giving students a master's degree, in my view, actually you are ripping them off. And we're trying to cut content, but it's impossible because the world is becoming increasingly complex. So actually, therapists need to learn this stuff. They need to learn social systems and how they work, because social systems are becoming more and more complex. They need to learn how to deal with constantly evolving technological advancement. They need to know how to reason around that. They need to learn so many things. So what do you cut out? And so we decided to go into a doctorate. So I was a supporter of OTD for that reason, because I thought that, either we cut the number of credits for a master's, and I don't know what we cut, because everything we put there seems to be necessary, or we upgraded to a doctorate. Now, obviously, with the occupational therapy assistant education, probably it's the same problem, because occupational therapy assistants also have to learn a lot of things to deal with today's healthcare world. And so how do they do that while keeping the credits low at a bachelor's level or at an associate degree level? So those are the problems we are facing. So my thinking is that the real issue is not whether we offer the degree level that we offer, is how to deal with student the fees. How do we deal with the student loans and students going into hundreds and hundreds of dollars in debt to obtain an education? I think that's what society needs to talk about really. To me, that's the issue. I don't know what the other folks think.
Yeah, hi, this is Arlie. One of my thoughts about, going to a bachelor's for an OT assistant is about accessibility. It's often, and accessibility for, more so African-American people, because, in Philadelphia, I remember working at Temple University Hospital, which is, in a predominantly Black neighborhood. And I often, it's a trauma 1 hospital. And I can think of my 12 years there, how many kids that came in there for, working with them with programs like pipeline programs, or even patients. I remember a few patients asked me, and I in particular, one gunshot wound patient, and he said to me, "How can I do what you do?" And we had established a relationship afterwards, and we stopped talking because he felt, trying to get a bachelor's or a master's degree was way too far for him to go. Here's a guy who's on the street who wants to find better, but it's just too difficult to go down that route. And I just find, accessibility is being taken away if we start, going for, making the entry level of bachelor's for people of color who tend to have, sometimes don't have their family support to get them through those 4 years and so forth. So that's my opinion.
And that is very true. It's a really complex problem that we face. Now, I don't know, folks in England, how do you keep the credit loan reasonable?
So it's Mushrat again.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's anyone else from England, but I'll just jump in because I'm in education for occupational therapy. I mean, we've got so many routes. We've got the undergrad route, which is a 3-year full-time or a 4-year part-time, or you can go the master's route, but that's a 2-year accelerated. It gets you to the same endpoint, but different routes. So you're still pre-registration. You have to get your license to practice, but these are the recognized courses. So you can enter at postgrad level with a postgrad diploma or a master's or a Bachelor of Science through a full-time or part-time route. And we have seen a good steady increase in our representation of Black, Asian and minoritized ethnicities. We have seen a good increase by having these different routes.
Yeah, and I think that's probably what we need to experiment with. Probably we need to look at what is happening in other parts of the world and how they are managing, and see whether we can learn how to do this differently.
Arlie made a good point, a great point actually, regarding how some people can transition from their current life into this program. And I know that I've been in touch with a few, I started out as a transporter, and that was how as I was exposed to the profession. But I was recently in a hospital situation where I was on the flip side, the patient side, and I worked I saw a lot of the transporters, and I tried to get their story and try to see how I could help. And most of them, like Arlie said, are not in the position where they could put their lives on hold to finish a 6-year whatever program. So if we don't have ways to support them, even the 2-year program is like so monumentous for them. So we got to really think about real life for people that want to proceed into our profession. And if it's an OTD program, that's now that is now going to be a major obstacle for some people that don't have the resources or the support system in place to be able to attain that.
And just jumping onto that, what you said, Mr. Gardner, is, well, we're occupational therapists, so who better to do that and to come up with these ideas to us, helping us adapt the education to the consumer. So we can see that this is still a debatable and sometimes contentious issue, and we have many facets to consider. We're coming upon our closing up time. I want to throw it back to Mr. Champagne for now. Thank you all for all the questions.
We also wanted to just ask if you had any last minute questions or comments on just any feedback. We just wanted to something that we want to do to support our profession, to help, meet society's occupational needs. And we want to just be as, supportive of our profession as possible, and just help our profession grow. We know it's a rough time in OT with the changing regulatory landscape, but anybody have any last minute comments or questions, you can jump in now. And also, one of our goals is to help OT programs. If you're trying to do some recruiting, we can assist any mentorship programs that we can assist with to help, increase diversity in your program. Or if you have any students currently who you need mentorship, we provide mentorship to graduate students and OTA students. We want to just be a partner with you guys and just to serve our profession well. So anybody can jump in now if you want to.
I think we have a comment from Mr. Tremaine Thurman.
Okay.
Hey, first of all, I want to say thank you for the opportunity to have connected with such a group of, should I say, authentic gentlemen. I've been an OT for 16 years and actually 17 years. And other than myself being in the small town that I'm in, I don't know of any other African-American occupational therapists. And when I came to town, I was the only male doing pediatrics, and now male doing pediatrics and hand therapy as well. So it's been amazing. Here is my question. My question comes from the level of engagement. I have a unique opportunity where we focus on, we like to say within our private practice or entity we serve, we are a leadership development company that just happens to be serving therapy in a dual zone environment, contributing to OT and PT. When you talk about engagement and when we're thinking about the cohort that we're working with, so myself being, a little bit older in the service of occupational therapy, and then those individuals who may be new grads or individuals we'll connect with at the university level. I would like at least a thinking partner to collaborate with quickly on this whole process of how you're engaging this current population that we're working with, rather new grads or those who will be graduating soon, on diversity topics. Engage them to the point where it's not defensive, but it's eye-opening. It's bringing a level of awareness to then prepare them, if they're minority, for what they will encounter from either staffing or either clients, or if they're non-minority, what they may or what they should be aware of, especially in their interactions, that they might be privy to, that folks of our color, our skin tone, are not privy to because we don't have that advantage. Can somebody speak to that level of how to engage them to prepare them for that conversation?
Dr. Moses, you want to jump in? Or Fred,
Well,
anybody can jump in?
yeah, here's what I think. You know, you can't do what you cannot conceptualize. And so the first step has being out there, so that when these young people see us, they see what is possible for themselves. That's the first step. And then, of course, the second step is speaking with them. So here we usually go recruiting students, and we'll go to high schools and so forth. And of course, when we are recruiting, well, no, now I don't do as much recruiting because I'm busy with others, but I would actually specifically go and talk to minority students and explain to them what occupational therapy is, what we do, why it is exciting, and so forth. So I think making ourselves visible is one thing, and then actually actively recruiting, visiting them where they are, and telling them what we do. Because in general, even the general public doesn't quite understand what occupational therapy is.
Yeah, Dr. Dr. Covington had actually shared his experience as to why he dresses as smartly as he does. And I've seen him, I've known him for a number of years now in the professional entity as we meet at AOTA. And I've always wondered why he was so positively dressed all the time. And he explained it to us just a few weeks ago. But what I can say to you is, even if it's not, whatever it is, even your dress or however you interact with the individuals around you, make sure you, how I explain it, you don't code switch. Don't change what's normal, natural about you, but make sure that you present a positive overall in what you're bringing to the table as an OT. And I tell people this: I'm not the best speaker, but I would like when people see my passion in the topic that I'm sharing, and I have a desire to see that we have equity in this profession, equity in our presence in this country and the world as it is. When people see my passion, then they understand where I'm coming from. So. Yeah, so with that, I tell people, like in my group my school, I want to make sure that everyone is culturally responsive in how they provide therapy in my entity where I work. So that's where I have some influence. So look to where you have some influence and you share that information to such a degree that it's in the end it's a positive for all involved with you and those who you share it with.
And I'm gonna say one thing too. Working here in Washington D.C. and Maryland, it's a very, if you guys know, it's a very diverse population here in the D.C. Maryland, Virginia area. And in OT school, we learn about the therapeutic use of self. And if you're in a urban city, if you're like a Houston or Atlanta or Charlotte or Cleveland or New York or DC, I work at some facilities that have upwards of a half the population are Black men in the whole facility. And so, that's one thing that I'm able to have hope. think I do, have good clinical outcomes because I'm able to just, just be myself and relate to people on just a, a down to earth level. And that helps with participation. And so, that's just why we need to increase diversity so we can, what the A.O.T.H.A. said, we want to meet society's occupational needs. It's critical because otherwise sometimes participation is all about who you are, how you engage with a client. So sometimes it's not whether they can do it or not. It's maybe because they just don't want to participate because they're not engaged very well. So that's my perspective of how I, when I treat patients.
Thank you.
We got about another 2-3 minutes. So we want to end last minute jump-ins, comments, feedback. Going once, going twice. I would love to, have you guys.
Again, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I wonder if I can be a bit controversial, because I think if we are going to get, as people racialized, as person of color, and I use the word racialized because these terms are done to us. We didn't choose them, people put them on us. So I use those terms racialized as or minoritized as, but we need to get a bit personal and political. I'm finding I need to go back and use John Lewis's words, and I have a t-shirt as well, and I say good trouble. And good trouble through collaborative conversations, not confrontation, not confrontation. You need collaboration because we can't do it on our own. We need a growing collective, and I've started to do that. I'm growing a collective by pricking people's consciousness, but having collaborative conversations. So you got to attack this, like Professor Ikiugu says, on a looking at it as a complex social problem. You as guys having a better representation in occupational therapy. And you can only do that at a multi-systems attack. You got to go, the foundation is corrupt. It's Western centric. It's already corrupt. The focus is on whiteness, so, and we've started to see that, and not as an attack. It's a construct, the construct of whiteness, not individual people who are white, and we have to start to disrupt it before we can dismantle it. So you have to start disrupting the corrupted foundation on a multi-systems level.
And actually, I think you are right on point, because we are dealing with a complex system presenting complex problems. And since I study complexity, I guess it's my business to understand what this means. Think of it this way. If you are doing a puzzle, whether it's a picture puzzle or a crossword puzzle, if you are not looking at the whole picture, if you can't visualize the whole picture, you are not going to succeed. So it's in the same vein. If we are trying to solve a problem piecemeal by looking at this, if we solve this piece, then everything will be okay. And doesn't work. You have to have a multi-pronged approach, whereby you are looking at different things at once. So the way we represent ourselves, but also that combine that with advocacy, combine that with political and activism, so that some of the problems are problems that affect white and black, everyone. Like for instance, why are student fees so high? No one seems to be able to explain that. And the solution to that is certainly political. So we have to approach this from multiple points, not in just one point.
Good point. Last minute, going once, going twice. We're over our time now, so I don't want to hold anyone up. But this is a rich conversation, and I would love to keep it going, but we want you guys to come back. But like I just said, we we left you guys a small certificate of appreciation for attending our event. And if you can do the exit survey, we would appreciate it. But if not, thank y'all for a good evening. And the brothers, stay on the call, please. Have a good night, guys.
Good night, all.